Please be seated. Mr. O'Mara, call your next witness, please.
Defense will call Tracy Martin, Your Honor.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
You may proceed.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
State your name, please.
Tracy Benjamin Martin.
And, of course, you're Trayvon Martin's father.
Yes.
You've been here for the testimony throughout the trial, correct?
Correct.
Including today when we had a couple of officers testifying about an event where you had gone to meet with investigator Chris Serino at Sanford Police Department.
Correct.
Remember that?
Yes.
Do you remember the event itself, having gone down there? I believe you went with Brandy Green?
Yes.
Okay. Did you have a conversation with Officer Serino about why he wanted you down at the station?
Yeah, initially we were going down to the police department to make sure that he had verified that Trayvon had been identified. Detective Serino didn't bring me to the station. I actually went to the station myself.
Okay. With Miss Green?
Correct.
And at some point, you did go back to his sort of office cubicle area and listen to some tapes, is that correct?
Correct.
My understanding is, from my knowledge of the discovery, was that you listened to a number of tapes, one of which was the tape that we're identifying as the Lauer 911 call, correct?
Yes.
And he did play that for you?
Yes.
And were you listening to it as he played it for you?
Yes.
Understand that it was difficult to listen to. It included the shot that ended your son's life, correct?
Yes.
At the end of that tape, do you recall Officer Serino asking you whether or not you could identify your son's voice?
Not those exact words, but something to that nature, yes.
Okay. Do you recall the words as best you can recall that he used?
As best as I recall, after he played the tape, he basically just said, "Do you recognize the voice?"
And what was your response?
My response was just simply, I didn't tell him that I didn't know. I didn't tell him, no, that wasn't Trayvon. I think the chairs had wheels on them, and I kind of pushed away from the table and just kind of shook my head and said, "I can't tell."
So your words were, "I can't tell."
Something to that effect, but I never said, no, that wasn't my son's voice.
You heard Officer Serino testify that you said no, correct?
Correct.
And you heard Officer Singleton also testify that she was about 8 or 10 feet, and she heard you say no, or an indication that you acknowledged it was not Trayvon's voice. Is that correct?
Before Officer Singleton even testified, the first time Officer Singleton testified, that was the first time I ever seen her. I had no idea that she was even in the vicinity.
Right, you didn't notice her there, correct?
No.
But you heard her testify that she heard you, correct?
Yes, I heard her testify.
As you were here today.
I heard her testify to that, but I didn't see her in the room.
Okay. Did you ever say to anyone, did you ever ask to hear the tape a second time?
Not at that moment, no.
Did you ever tell anybody that you had listened to a cleaned up version of the tape and were then able to identify the voice on it?
What do you mean, cleaned up version?
I'm asking you, sir.
To my knowledge, the tape that I listened to is the same tape that's circulating. That's the only tape I know of. I have no knowledge of a cleaned up version.
Okay. So the question then is, did you ever tell anybody, your attorney or anybody else?
I never told anyone that I listened to a cleaned up version of the tape.
Okay. Or an enhanced version?
I have no knowledge of an enhanced version.
Did you ever tell Sabrina Fulton, your ex-wife, that you had listened to the tape at Officer Sereno's desk?
I hadn't told her, no.
Was there any reason why you didn't give her that information?
There was a lot of stuff going on. We had just buried our son. A lot of emotions, and you just don't think of every little detail that you've been through. It was obviously it was a tragic and still is a tragic time for us. So just to answer your question, did I tell Ms. Fulton that I listened to the tape? No, I didn't. Now,
You were at the mayor's office when the tape was played for the entire family, correct?
Correct.
And you were there as well, listening to the tape?
Yes.
Did you ever take an opportunity to tell Ms. Fulton or any of the other family members before the tape was played what they were going to hear?
No, I didn't.
Is there any reason why you didn't advise them of that?
I'm sure they were aware of what we were doing at the mayor's office, so there was no reason for me to confirm, in fact, that we were there to listen to the tapes.
And was it at that time in the room with everybody else, or what did you say about the tape when you listened to it that time in the mayor's office?
What do you mean, what did I say?
Did you acknowledge anything about the tape to anybody?
After listening to the tape for maybe 20 times, I said I knew that was Trayvon's voice. I didn't direct that towards any family members. Matter of fact, I think the family members had started leaving out the room. It was too much for them. They couldn't take it. And I just decided to sit there and listen to it.
Had you listened to the tape between the time that Officer Sereno played it for you on about the 28th of February and about the 16th of March when you heard it in the mayor's office?
No, listened to it in Detective Sereno's cubicle and then again in the mayor's office.
Okay, no time in between?
No.
Okay. Have a moment, Your Honor. Thank you, Your Honor, for the question.
Thank you. Cross?
Martin, even at this time, is it hard for you to believe that your son is not longer living?
It's very difficult to believe that Trayvon's not living.
Okay.
As I said over and over, that was my best friend in life, and to have him gone is tragic.
Okay. You were asked two areas that I want to cover with you that Mr. O'Mara asked you about. The 911 call that you heard, or the calls, the recordings that you heard at SPD, or Sanford Police Department. You remember going there?
Yes.
Now, in terms of this jury understanding the context, that your son was killed late evening Sunday, February 26th. And you would have gone over to the Sanford Police Department the morning of the I believe it's the 28th. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And I believe also you really found out your son was dead at some point, actually the 27th. Is that true? That
Correct.
Monday?
Yes.
Okay. And was it still hard for you to believe that your son was dead?
It's still hard to this day that he's dead.
Okay. And officers had come to your house, I believe, on the 27th and told you that your son was dead, right? First, they wanted to verify that that was your son, in terms of, because he didn't have a ID with him, so they wanted for you to verify that he was the person that they found out in the courtyard of that retreat at Twin Lakes where Brandy Green lived, right?
Correct.
Okay. And I gather you went and got a picture of your son just to show them who your son was, or did they show you a picture of the person that at that time was just described as an unknown person out of the courtyard? They showed you a picture of a body there on the ground, correct?
Check, Your Honor, may we approach?
Yes.
All right, proceed, Your Honor.
Yes, you may.
Mr. Martin, I was asking you about the 27th. Detective Serino, or Investigator Serino, had come and showed you a photograph, is that correct? And you identified it as being your son, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now we move to the 28th, where they asked you to go down to the police station, correct?
Correct.
And you go down with your fiance at the time, Brandy Green, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And at that time, they played several recordings to you, correct?
Yeah, they played a series of the 911 calls.
Okay. And these were calls where neighbors that had called in regarding what you now knew was the death of your son, correct?
Correct.
Right. And the recordings were of people calling and explaining that somebody had been shot, and I'm sure you listened to the person now identified as Ms. Gordyka, the lady who went hysterical in the 911 call. You were listening to all that, is what I'm saying.
To my recollection, I don't think Detective Serino played each call in its entirety.
Okay.
He played some of the, to my knowledge, he played some of each call leading up to the last call with the fatal shot.
All right. So they played the call then of the cries for help, and then you actually hear a shot, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And am I safe to assume that you still at that time were in denial in the sense of not wanting to believe that your son was dead?
Correct.
Okay. And this was an emotional time for you, would that be fair to say?
Very emotional.
I must object and refer to the
Then give
court's,
me your,
previous ruling.
okay. We're now on to the day of the phone calls being played overruled.
This was a very emotional time for you while this was going on in terms of, I'm talking about the day the recording was played for you at the Sanford Police Department, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And you listened to the recording, and as you stated, described to the jury, you pulled your chair back in disbelief that you were actually listening to voices for help, and also, more importantly, also a shot.
Correct.
You realized that that was the shot
That killed my son, yes.
Did you really know what to do at that point?
No, my world was from that point until today, my world has just been turned upside down.
Okay. And let's focus on that day. Then, after you heard the cries for help, or the recording that's been referred to as a Lauer recording, and then also the shot, At that same time, or right there, Investigator Sereno asked you about the recording, if you could recognize the voice, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And I'm assuming that was difficult for you to even contemplate identifying or not identifying the voice, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And as best you could, you attempted to answer Investigator Sereno, is that true?
Yes.
Okay. Now, as was pointed out, there was a lot of commotion in that recording, wasn't there? The yells for help, the person calling, and then most importantly, the shot too. How, in terms of your mind, what was going through your mind, can you describe through your jury what was going through your mind when you were listening to that?
Basically what I was listening to, I was listening to my son's last cry for help. I was listening to his life being taken. And I was trying to come to grips that Trayvon was here no more. It was just tough.
And as Mr. O'Mara pointed out, subsequent time you were present when that recording was played again at the mayor's office. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And I believe your former wife, Ms. Fulton, was present, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And I think you said you wanted to listen to it. Did you listen to that recording and then other recordings at that time too?
I can't remember I can't remember if it was all of the 911 calls or was it just that last 911 call. But I do remember that I took whole control of the mouse or the clicker or whatever it was that they had, and I was able to rewind that same tape over and over again.
Did you want to, I guess, hear your son's voice over and over? Did that bring you any comfort, I guess, is what I'm trying to ask.
Object again, and same relevancy objection as before in the court ruled on.
Overruled.
May I have the question read back for some further argument? There's
No, I'll be glad to rephrase the question.
Okay, thank you.
You were playing that recording over and over. You were still dealing with this?
Yes,
His death?
Yes.
Now, it was sometime in March. It was later. It wasn't like days later. You were still having to deal with his death?
Correct.
Okay. And you played it, you said, did you actually write down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or you're estimating you played it at least 20 times?
I'm estimating that I played it maybe 20 times.
Okay. And you played it over and over. Why? Were you trying to deal with this, or why were you doing that?
It wasn't as much as I was trying to deal with it. I was just trying to figure out on the night of February 26, 2012, why did the defendant get out of his vehicle and chase my son?
And you weren't there when it happened, correct?
Correct.
And this recording, I guess, is one of the last things in terms of hearing the voice and the shot. You were trying to, as best you can, figure out what happened or why it happened?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. No further questions.
Can you redirect?
yes. Do you believe that the police lied when the two officers said that you said no about it being your son?
Objection, Your Honor, is improper about what somebody else is saying.
Foundation question for another one, Your Honor. I think it's necessary.
Well, you have to rephrase your question because it's not proper to have a witness comment on another witness.
I'll do it this way then. Did you ever instruct your attorney, Ben Crump? You didn't have Ben Crump when you listened to the tape on the 27th, or the 28th, did you?
No.
He was not your attorney at that point?
No, it wasn't.
Later, did you instruct him to say that the police lied when they said that you couldn't tell, when they said that you had said no about it being your son's voice? Did you instruct your lawyer to say that?
I never instructed anyone to say anything.
You never instructed Ben Crump to say that the police had lied about that?
I never instructed anyone to say anything.
Did you instruct your lawyer, Ben Crump, to say that the audio has since been cleared up and now you can hear it better?
No, I didn't.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you. May Mr. Martin be excused?
Yes, Your Honor. Subject to recall, obviously.
Okay, Mr. O'Mara, may Mr. Martin step down?
Certainly.
Okay, thank you, sir. You may step down. Call your next witness, please.
Chief Bill Lee, Your Honor.
Okay.
Do solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
You may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. Afternoon, sir. State your name, please.
My name is Billy Ray Lee, Jr.
And on February 26, 2012, what was your occupation?
I was the chief of police for the city of Sanford.
You're no longer in that position?
No, sir.
When did that end?
June 22nd, 2013. 2012, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Were you then chief of police during the initial investigation stages of the case that brings us here today, State versus George Zimmerman?
Yes, sir.
If you would just tell the jury a little bit about your background in law enforcement.
I have 30 years of law enforcement experience. I started at the Seminole County Sheriff's Office as a road patrol deputy in 1982. I was promoted through the ranks to the position of captain. I retired in 2009 at that rank of captain in charge of our Special Operations Division and Emergency Services Division. 9 years of that experience was in investigations, 5 years as an investigator, 4 as a supervisor.
And where'd you grow up?
I was born and raised in Sanford.
It's your hometown?
Yes, sir.
Did becoming chief of Sanford Police Department then be sort of a pinnacle in your career for its law enforcement?
Yes, it was.
How long were you with Sanford PD as its chief?
I'm sorry.
How long were you with Sanford PD as its chief?
From May of 2011 to June of 2012.
Did you say that you came out of retirement in order to take that position?
I retired from the Seminole County Sheriff's Office and took a position with Seminole State College as their director of the Center for Public Safety. We provided training, certificate training in the areas of law enforcement, corrections, firefighting, and paramedic and EMT services, and also a 2-year degree program in each of those disciplines.
And were you then sort of recruited from that teaching position to get reactivated in law enforcement as the chief of Sanford PD?
That position came available while I was still at the Sheriff's Office, and I applied for that.
Particular to this case then, I presume that you were you hands-on, or were you just in a supervisory role over the investigation with the George Zimmerman case?
I was in a supervisory or administrative role at the police department.
But did you have particular focus on this case as well as time went on from February 26th during the time that you still had involvement in the case?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did that also include the playing of a 911 call for the Martin family members? Were you aware of that decision? And I want to focus you at this point, simply were you aware that that decision had been made, that the tape was going to be played for the Martin family?
My recommendation was that the 911...
I want to be careful a little bit. That's why I focused the question. I don't want to spend a lot of time dealing with the decision to play the tape. I want to focus once that decision was made, we'll talk about then that point forward. So you are aware, were you not, that a decision was made that the tape would be released to be played to the Martin family. Is that
Yes,
correct? Okay. Once that decision had been made, I want to focus you on the way that the recording was played for the Martin family, okay?
Yes, sir.
So, generally speaking, with your experience in law enforcement, within the context of what we will call lineups, or whether that be a visual lineup or an audio lineup, what are the best practices as to how to handle lineups generally?
Generally, just as enough, for example, a photo lineup, you would show that photo array or that piece of evidence to a potential witness in a case individually.
Okay. And what is the purpose of doing it individually rather than in a group?
So their decision is not influenced.
One from the other? One witness influencing another witness?
Yes, sir.
So if in fact you were showing, as an example, a photo lineup to this jury and asked them if they could pick out me, would you do it as a group, as a jury, or would you do it individually, one juror at a time?
You should do it individually.
And the purpose of doing it individually as opposed to a group?
So their identification would not be influenced by others.
Is that a similar process then to what would be done with an audio lineup?
Should be, yes, sir.
And an audio lineup, similar to a photo lineup, is just having somebody listen to a piece of evidence to see if they can identify anything in that piece of evidence?
Yes, sir.
And that was what was going to happen in this case once the decision was made to play to the Martin family, correct? That it was going to be played for them?
It was my understanding that one member of their family had already listened to that tape. You know, again, my recommendation.
Right, we're going to talk, I want to talk about your recommendation as to anything other than once the decision was made, what was your recommendation as to how the tape should be played for the family members?
It should be played individually.
Okay. Do you know the result of how it was played? Was it played individually or as a group?
It's my understanding it was played in a group setting in the mayor's office.
Was law enforcement present?
No, sir.
In your years of experience, how is that normally an event that would be handled by law enforcement?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to have a moment, Your Honor. In this particular case, then, did you ask to be present during the time that the recording was to be played by for the family?
I offered to be present, yes, sir.
And was that accepted?
No, sir.
Were you excluded from the room?
Yes, sir.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you. Cross?
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
The mayor made a decision not to have you in there, is that correct?
I believe I asked the city manager if he wanted me to be in the
Right.
room, and they declined to have me.
City manager was your boss?
That's correct, yes, sir.
And so is the mayor, I'm assuming, too, by virtue of that? or-
In my position, my contract was with the city manager.
Okay, all right. And the recording itself was played in the mayor's office, correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And you weren't, I apologize, did I interrupt you?
No.
Did you finish answering?
I did.
Okay, thank you. And you were not present when the recording was played, correct?
I was not present in the mayor's office.
I
no,
think
sir.
you were in the same building, but not in the mayor's office when it was played.
That's correct.
Did I have that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, you were asked about the lineup, and just so the jury knows, in case they haven't heard of a lineup, what you're talking about is you don't want to have a suggestive. In other words, you don't want to have, normally a lineup includes 6 photographs, right?
Yes, sir.
And you have a person look at the lineup and then identify if they know one of the individuals that did something to them or was a witness or whatever. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And what you don't want to do is show them a photograph, just one by itself, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, also, in a lineup, you don't want a potential witness to a crime to have seen something on TV saying, this is the person, in this case is about this, and here's a photograph. You don't want to do that either, correct?
Preferably not. Yes,
Right?
sir.
Because that would be kind of tainting it, correct?
Correct.
So, in other words, if your experience, you had a case and the witness said, oh, I saw the photograph on TV or I heard the voice on TV and it was, they broadcasted regarding the case of Joe. Joe was a suspect. That would be tainted, correct?
Possibly.
Okay. And the reason is because then the person potentially was influenced by the fact that the case dealt with Joe, and they knew Joe was arrested, and there's a photograph of Joe, then that would be tainted, potentially, correct?
Possibly, yes, sir.
Okay. And that also would apply to voice, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I mean, voice and photo lineups, you kind of do the same thing, correct?
If you can, yes, sir.
Right, and when you say a voice lineup, you would actually have 6 separate recordings, to be fair in terms of completely accurate. You would have 6 separate voices, and you would have the person actually listen to all 6, and then say, if you did it similar to a photo lineup, you would have a person then say, which one do you recognize, correct?
If you could have 6
Right.
audio recordings that were similar in nature, and when you
Right.
prepare a lineup, there's supposed to be certain characteristics of that person that is the subject of that photo lineup that is similar to all the other photographs in the photo array.
Right, just like if you had a photo array, you wouldn't pick if the suspect had a beard, you wouldn't put one person with a beard and the other people without beards, correct?
That's correct, sir.
Because that would be suggestive, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, and so the jury understands, so in other words, you don't want somebody potentially making a decision based on what they've seen on TV of the photograph or the voice ID versus actually listening to it without having watched anything on TV about the case.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, redirect.
Please, just so we're clear on this case, the issue of who was screaming for help on the tape was still an issue that you, as the agency investigating the case, was looking into, correct?
We had, the evidence and testimony that we had gave us an indication of who voice it was screaming for help on the tape, but any other witnesses that we could try to corroborate that would be beneficial in trying to find the truth.
And the indications that you had from the other evidence was that it was George
Objection,
Zimmerman's
hearsay.
voice.
Beyond scope.
Beyond the scope, sustained.
But as to the tape itself and playing it for other witnesses, the potential witnesses are the Martin family themselves, were they not?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And Mr. DeLeon suggested that you'd go out and get 6 voices, but the reality in this case was that you would have done it in a way where each Martin family member would have listened to it themselves and come up with their own opinion as to who they heard, correct?
Objection, Mr. Levy.
Overruled.
That means you can answer.
Can you ask the question again?
Sure.
Thank you.
Within the confines of this case, is the best practice in this case, would the best practice have been to allow, once the decision was made, to have them listen to the tape, Would the best police practices have suggested that you let each family member listen to it individually and get their statement as to what they heard?
If it was for investigative purposes, to let the person that was going to listen to it individually so that you could get their response without influence.
And that you would avoid the influence of having them all listen to it at one time, correct?
Yes, sir.
And would you agree that in an emotional circumstance such as this one would be, that the possibility for influence is even greater?
It's possible, yes, sir.
Now, you had said that it was the city manager, in response to a question by Mr. De La Rionda. The city manager doesn't normally make police decisions, does he?
No, sir.
Does he go out and fight fires?
No, sir.
Leaves that to the fire department?
Yes, sir.
Leaves police work to the police department?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Nothing further on.
Thank you. May Mr. Lee be excused?
Yes, I don't have any further questions.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. You're excused.
We had discussed that this might be a good time to end for the day, and I would ask for that.
Ladies and gentlemen, although you might think that it's early to go for the day, which is 4:27, we have some matters that we do have to take care of outside your presence. So instead of keeping you back in the jury room, I'm going to excuse you for the evening. During the evening recess, you're not to read or listen to any radio, television, or newspaper reports about the case. You're not to discuss the case amongst yourselves or with anybody else. You're not to use any type of an electronic device to get on the internet to do independent research about the case, people, places, things, or terminology. And you're not to read or create any emails, text messages, Twitters, tweets, or blogs or social networking pages about the case. Do I have your assurances that you will abide by these instructions? Yes. Okay, with that, put your notes face down, follow Deputy Jarvis back, and have a good evening.